Most of you aren't just listening right now. You're driving, cleaning, and even exercising. But what if you could be saving money by switching to Progressive? Drivers who save by switching save nearly $750 on average, and auto customers qualify for an average of 7 discounts. Multitask right now. Quote today at progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates. National average 12-month savings of $744 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2022 and May 2023. Potential savings will vary. Discounts not available in all states and situations.
Everyone knows you can't beat the comfort of a pair of Crocs. But style doesn't get talked about enough. The edgy look and feel of the Echo Clog will bring your streetwear game to the next level. Plus, there are tons of new and exciting colors that'll match the look you're going for. It's time to bring the heat and build your look with Crocs Echo Clog. Shop the Echo Clog collection on crocs.com.
Before I started the strip, I wrote a 50-year-long outline, but it's a loose outline. I had no idea where it was going to go. I didn't know where the country was going to go. I did think I'd be doing less and less of it because I thought things were going to improve and I'd have less to be upset about. That's not the case.
Welcome back to Working. I'm your host, Isaac Butler.
And I'm your other host, Ronald Young Jr.
Ronald, it is always great to see your smiling face on our Zoom call while we record this. Who is that we heard at the top of this week's episode?
That was the voice of Darrin Bell.
And who is Darrin, and why did you want him on the show?
Darrin Bell is a Pulitzer Prize-winning cartoonist who recently published the audiobook of his graphic novel, The Talk, which is a pontification on race relations in the United States framed around his life story. I know that's a mouthful, but it's incredible. It's a very poignant work, and since he also publishes a daily comic strip called Candorville, I was very interested in exactly how he gets all of his work done.
Yeah, now I am too. Do our Slate Plus listeners get a little something extra this week?
Well, Isaac, Darrin is a huge and longtime fan of science fiction. He loves Star Trek and Star Wars and Battlestar Galactica. The trifecta. Yeah, I'm about to do a rewatch. I just can't wait.
You know what's my favorite part of that is, you got the woman singing what I assume is a gibberish language, and then there's all the ships are gathered, and one of them looks exactly like a men's electric razor.
Yes.
The last one to warp off, you're like, is that an electric razor? Anyway, sorry, go on.
So this Slate Plus section is either going to be right up your alley or extremely polarizing because it is a deep dive into the Star Wars cinematic universe. We talk about the ways in which we both love and hate the way those movies and television shows have been made throughout the years.
That's amazing. And if you're one of our Slate Plus members, that will be waiting for you at the end of the show. If you are not one of our Slate Plus members already, what are you waiting for? You don't have to be a Greedo anymore. You could be like, the Chewbacca when he gets the medal at the end of the first movie. And by the first movie, I mean A New Hope. Go to slate.com/working plus right now and sign up for Slate Plus. You get full access behind the paywall. You get bonus segments on shows like this one. You get bonus full episodes of shows like Dakota Ring. And you get to feel one with the Force for supporting everything that we do right here on Working. All right, that's enough shilling from me. Let's listen in on Ronald's conversation with cartoonist Darrin Bell.
When you hear a good idea, it's natural to do a double take. That's what you might do when you hear Discover will automatically double the cashback you've earned on your credit card at the end of your first year with Cashback Match. Wait, what? Yep, double the cashback is something so good you might do a triple take. Get rewarded no matter who you are or how much you spend with Discover. See terms at discover.com/credit card.
Who are you and what do you do?
I'm Darrin Bell. I'm a Pulitzer Prize-winning editorial cartoonist and the creator of the comic strip Candorville. And I'm also the creator of the graphic novel, The Talk.
So tell me your earliest memory of doing something creative.
My earliest memory, I had to be 3 years old, and I was drawing a map of my neighborhood on the wall of my closet. My parents discovered it, and after my dad was done yelling, my mom took me to the art store and bought me some art supplies and some paper. And she started teaching me how to draw because she was an artist herself.
What did you use to make that map on the wall? Like, what were you using before, like crayons or?
No, I was using whatever pens I found in my dad's desk.
How was it discovered? Like, they were like looking for some clothes. They're like, "What is this?"
I'll never forget. I was in the closet drawing. I remember my dad saying that he hears a mouse somewhere, and so I got scared. I thought it was in there with me. But, I just froze, and he poked his head in the closet, and I guess I was what he was hearing.
Wait, it turns out you were the mouse all along?
I was the mouse, yeah.
What a twist.
My mom loved it, but my dad, all he could think about was that we're not going to get that rental deposit back.
Oh, parents, man. I'm wondering, like, when I think about you, I think about growing up in class. Like, I was born in the 80s, so I was growing up in the 90s. In our art classes or our art sections of elementary school, whatever, there was always one or two kids who were just a cut above everybody else in art. It was just like, I think you have some talent here. Were you that kid? Was that you?
I was that kid. That was my superpower from the start.
How did you develop that from something that you just enjoyed doing and that you were good at into something that became more of a career? Do you remember a turning point from you saying, "Hey, I'm just drawing cartoons. I'm a really good drawer." People saying that Darrin's a really good artist. How did that turn into something that you thought was tangible that you could make money doing?
I knew from the start that was something I could make money doing, because my father and I, we didn't have the closest relationship because he was always working, and when he got home, he didn't want to be bothered by his kids. He just wanted to relax on the couch and then go to sleep. But one thing we would do together was read the comics page in the LA Times and the LA Herald Examiner. We got both papers just because my dad loved all the comics. I knew from the start that that's something people did for a living. And when I saw how much it made my father laugh and how much fun we had laughing together, I thought, that's what I want to do. I want to do stuff that's going to make my father laugh.
That's incredibly sweet. And as you started to understand that was something that you wanted to do, were you just focused on that task moving forward? Or, because I imagine even as a kid, I wanted to be an engineer, and then several iterations later, I am not an engineer. So how do you stay focused on that task moving forward?
Well, it was pretty easy. I had a brother he was brilliant at math, and I was not, but I was great at art, and he was just okay at it. I had him as my competition. I thought he's clearly going to do something with math his whole life. So since I'm good at art, I'm going to do something with art, and we'll see who does better in the end.
Your motivations for doing things are very funny. They're very poignant, I should say. To say that this is just a competition between you and your brother is very entertaining to hear.
Yeah, well, it started off that way. When I was around 10, after my dad left, things kind of changed. My brother sort of stopped being my rival and kind of stepped into the role of, he thought he also had to be my father figure. So he started encouraging me and praising me, and, we'd still argue and stuff, and I'd still get on his nerves, but he started giving me constructive criticism instead of just, telling me, "Oh, you suck, go away." And he started letting me read his comic books that he previously hadn't let me anywhere near. So I got to the artwork of people like John Byrne and Art Adams, George Perez. So that's when my ambitions took a detour. I stopped wanting to draw comic strips and political cartoons, and I started wanting to become a comic book artist. And
Wow.
I'd spend all my time practicing drawing Spider-Man, Wolverine, all that stuff. It wasn't until I got to high school that I kind of rekindled my passion for comic strips and editorial cartoons while I was working on the student newspaper. I quickly became the editor of the paper, and we were very short-staffed. There were like 4 of us, and we had like 12 pages to fill. So I would assign like 3 articles to each person. I would write 5 myself for every issue, but we still wound up with holes in the paper. So since I knew how to draw and we didn't have any comics, I started drawing a comic strip and I started drawing political cartoons. And when I saw the response to those, like nobody ever commented on my articles that I wrote, but people were always talking about my comic strip to me. So that's when I realized that's really what I should be doing, because I love doing it and people seem to enjoy reading them. So, I thought if I just keep plugging away at that, sooner or later, I mean, my classmates noticed it, the administration noticed it and liked it. Sooner or later, if I just keep sending my work out to syndicates and newspapers, they're going to notice it too, and they're going to take a chance on it.
Talk to me about what it takes to get a comic strip into a newspaper. A lot of people don't know. You just said something about syndication, but even as a kid growing up who also loved the comics, I used to read them with my mother all the time. That was the part of the newspaper that we were like fighting each other for, especially the Sunday comics. And I didn't even know that there were daily comics. When I found that out, I was like, there's comics every day. I need that newspaper every day. But talk to me about the process of getting your strip into a paper. Generally, what's that like? And then specifically, what was it like for you?
Well, I had a roadmap. I mean, my mother bought me a book called Artists and Writers Market. She bought me every new edition that came out. I started reading it in junior high. I read it all the way through high school. It was kind of like my Bible, I guess. So I knew what it would take to get syndicated. It would take having a really outstanding presentation. You'd have to, summarize it, have a good tagline that catches their attention. You have to have compelling characters. You have to describe the characters, and then you have to present them with a month's worth of comic strips so that they know you can sustain it over time. But I also found out in that book that each syndicate at the time, this was like the 90s when I started submitting, each syndicate was receiving at least 6,000 submissions a year.
Wow.
And many of them wouldn't ever even be considered because they were just too many for them to go through. And it was usually just 1 or 2 people, an editor and her assistant, looking through all these thousands of things. And they only launched 2 per year at the time, 2 comics.
Oh my God. That is a crazy percentage. I won't even do the math. We'll let your brother do the math on that, but that's the odds are against you, it feels like.
Yeah, the odds of becoming a professional cartoonist were a lot less than the odds of becoming a professional actor.
Wow.
So they only launched 2 a year. So once they found their 2, they stopped looking at the rest of the submissions. So you had to do something to get yourself toward the top. And it's not like they wouldn't look through the submissions. They'd look through them, and they'd only look at like the first few sentences of what you wrote. And if it didn't grab them, they'd go to the next one before they even looked at the comics. So I decided that I needed some kind of edge. And so I decided I needed to be published first. So that in my first line, I could say, I draw this comic strip for such and such newspaper.
Yes.
I figured that would make them keep reading. I was told early on not to ever work for free, and I never did, but I worked for damn near free. I think the first place I was published was a newsletter called Continental News Time. And I only agreed to do that because the title of that had the word news in it. So I knew that if an editor read it, right away they'd think it's a newspaper.
That's clever.
And once I was in there, I got into a couple other tiny like papers with like circulations of under 100 or so. But anyway, I put that in the submissions, and they didn't accept it right away, the syndicates, but I got the next best thing. Usually when they reject you, they just send you a postcard. But United Media, the editor there, Amy Lago, sent me a 2 or 3 page handwritten rejection letter.
Wow.
Which detailed everything she loved about it and everything she hated about it.
Okay, that's a gift.
Yeah. And so I thought, wow, I've got to keep sending to this person. So, while I was getting my editorial cartoons into newspapers, which was a lot easier, I would just fax them to the opinion page editors, and eventually they started buying them. I was also working on Candorville, on the comic strip submissions, and I would send them to Amy Lago like every couple months, incorporating her notes.
Yeah.
And finally, I wound up getting a different comic strip syndicated first, but with Amy Lago, and the reason she wanted that comic strip was because she knew who I was from all my submissions. That other comic strip was called Rudy Park, which I did with a writing partner. It's funny. It's like a really circuitous path. You don't know what's going to lead to you getting noticed or getting purchased or acquired. Rudy Park wouldn't have been syndicated if I hadn't been rejected so many times for Candorville by the same person who picked Rudy Park up for syndication. And then once Rudy Park was syndicated, she kept encouraging me to submit Candorville too.
So Candorville is like kind of your like signature work. Tell me about what that is for listeners who don't know.
Well, Candorville is about a young black writer and his diverse group of friends who tried to stay tight as they grew up, even though life was dragging them in different directions. And he became a journalist. His friend Clyde became a gangster rapper. And his friend Susan became an advertising executive. Now, Candorville is really personal to me. It began as a class project in high school. So Candorville kind of spoke for me. The main character, Lamont Brown, spoke for me. And that's something I wanted to continue doing as I went to college and started working for the college paper. And it's something that I wanted to put into newspapers because I was saying an awful lot in Candorville that I didn't see other people saying. And I thought there's got to be room for my voice too. Because if I'm thinking this stuff, I'm sure millions of other people are too.
What types of things were you saying?
Well, stuff about race, about police brutality, about social justice. There wasn't an awful lot of that on the newspaper page. There was Doonesbury and there was Bloom County. Both were by white baby boomers. There was very little by people of color that was in more than like 20 newspapers. So my goal was to create something like that would get into hundreds of newspapers, and it did. At one point, there were 6 strips by minorities in the newspapers, and I thought that was too little. So I organized like a comics page sit-in with the other cartoonists of color. Because we realized that there were only ever no more than 2. There was Candorville and La Cucaracha, or there was Boondocks and Curtis. There were no more than 2 on every comics page. So we realized they must have a quota or something. There were maybe a couple dozen strips with white characters, and they didn't think that those were interchangeable just because the characters were white. They would look at the themes of those strips. They'd have a family strip, they'd have, a workplace strip, and they didn't do the same for us. For us, all they saw was color. So I organized a sit-in where we all drew the exact same strip, only with our own characters, to drive home the point that they think that we're interchangeable. And, that made the news. And for like 2 or 3 years after that, newspapers were adding more than 2. At one point, there were like 4 or 5 in a lot of the major newspapers. But then they ended up whittling those back down to 2 again once people stopped paying attention.
When did this happen?
This was the first decade of the 2000s.
Okay, because this sounds like it could have happened in 2020.
Well, now they're trying to whittle that down to none in a lot of papers. They're trying to erase us from the public square. Everywhere from TV to the workplace to to the comics page.
We'll be back with more of Ronald's conversation with Darrin Bell after this. This episode is brought to you by SAP. First, the bad news. SAP Business AI won't help you generate cubist versions of your family's holiday photos, but it will help you understand which supplier is best to help you roll out your plant-based packaging in Southeast Asia, identify the training your junior project manager needs to rise up the ranks, and automate repetitive tasks while you focus on big innovations. So you can be ready for the next opportunity. Revolutionary technology, real-world results. That's SAP Business AI. First, the bad news. SAP Business AI won't help you generate cubist versions of your family's holiday photos, but it will help you understand which supplier is best to help you roll out your plant-based packaging in Southeast Asia, identify the training your junior project manager needs to rise up the ranks, and automate repetitive tasks while you focus on big innovations, so you can be ready for the next opportunity. Revolutionary technology, real-world results. That's SAP Business AI. Hey listeners, it's Isaac Butler here. I just wanted to say, we want to hear from you. You never write, you never call. What are you doing out there? Just write us at working@slate.com or call us at 304-933-WORK to leave a voicemail. Let us know your creative triumphs, your creative struggles, what questions you have for us, what you'd like to tell us. We're here and we want to hear from you. Once again, that's working@slate.com or 304-933-WORK. Now, back to Ronald's conversation with Darrin Bell.
You do this for a living. Like, this is your job. And being that it is your job, like, there's one aspect of it to say that I'm being paid to do this, to produce a product. But I see a little bit of your work as activism. Do you see it that way?
Every bit of it I see as activism, even when I'm just talking about stuff that has nothing to do with race or politics.
Yeah.
Because I know a certain segment of this country is reading it and thinking that they know what my comic strip is because of the color of the characters and because of the color of the cartoonist. Mm-hmm. But here I go throwing them something about an alternate universe or some astronomical discovery, and that's not something they expected. And I see that as activism too.
How do you navigate wanting to just sometimes make comics? Because in a lot of ways, not grappling with everything that's going on around us when you are a person of color, when you are creative of color, feels irresponsible. But sometimes you just want to make a comic. So how do you navigate those two things?
Well, that's one reason I love doing comic strips, because I get to do it every single day. I could be political Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday, and then the other days of the week I could talk about anything. So I have plenty of time doing a daily comic strip to do it all. Candorville is kind of a stream of consciousness strip that way. And I mean, a lot of the feedback I've gotten has picked up on that. A lot of the positive feedback has in common the fact that they really like how they never really know what they're going to get that day, how I weave in and out of politics. And sometimes a strip will start off political, but then when you get to the punchline, you find it's something else. And vice versa. You know, something might start off innocuous, and then in the final panel, it hits you with a deep political point you hadn't been thinking about.
Talk to me about your daily practice. Like, you're making a daily comic strip. Can you take me through the process of where it goes from idea to on the page to submission?
That's a tough one because the strip is really focused through the main characters. That's how I keep it focused. But the subject matter is kind of all over the place intentionally. And so is my process. You know, sometimes I'll think of what I think is a funny image, and then I'll draw the image, and then I'll think of dialogue to go along with it. Other times I think of some kind of clever wordplay or some point that I want to make, and I'll write the dialogue just like I'm writing a screenplay or something, and then I'll do the artwork afterwards. It could go either way. I think I'd probably get bored if I had one rigid routine where I do it the same way all the time. But one part of my routine, I have to go for a walk in the morning to clear my head and to think about nothing except the grass I'm looking at or the birds that I'm hearing. And maybe on mile 2, I'll turn my music off and turn on Sirius and listen to Tom Hartman or some other political show. And by the time I get home, I usually have an idea of what I'm going to do. And when I get home, since I do multiple things, I have to decide, do I want to do this as an editorial cartoon or do I want to save this for Candorville? Mm-hmm. And if it's an editorial cartoon, I get to work right away on it. And I try to finish by like 4 when my kids' nap time is over so I could spend time with them. But if it's Candorville, I write down the idea or I draw the image that I thought of and I save it for Monday. And Monday is the day when I sit down and I put the whole week together, the whole Candorville week.
Put it together. Are you drawing it all on Monday or are you just planning it all on Monday?
I usually end up writing and drawing the whole thing on Monday. I mean, the rest of the week I'm thinking about it. Mm-hmm. And I might sketch some ideas or I might write some ideas in my notepad, but I sit down and do the actual work of putting it together on my MacBook Pro and on my iPad on Mondays.
Is there a sense of accomplishment that you feel, especially when you have like deadlines that continue to, roll through? When do you feel the most accomplished? Is it when you click submit or is it when you are like putting the final touches on a drawing? Like, when do you think you feel that good feeling of satisfaction having gotten it out? Is it during the feedback process?
I don't feel much accomplishment when I get feedback. I used to kind of live for feedback.
Yeah.
Before the country got so polarized. Candorville and my editorial cartoons, the first decade and a half of this century used to spark discussions that I was interested in engaging in. Even when people would disagree with me, they'd write with arguments to make. But something shifted during the presidency of Barack Obama. White supremacists in particular, and people who didn't realize that they were racist, and probably still don't, lost their damn minds.
Yeah.
The emails people sent me took a really, really dark turn. They went from wanting to have a discussion to wanting me to go away. That's the best way I could sum it up. I used to have Republicans write to me and tell me that they were grateful that I, showed them something that they disagreed with because it either reinforced what they were thinking or it gave them an opportunity to try to fix me, change my mind.
Yeah.
Or maybe, and if that didn't work,
not trying to fix me.
Yeah. I have this one conservative character in Candorville who Lamont always runs into at the bus stop. And the first decade or so, a lot of what he said was suggestions from Republican readers.
Wow.
And I think if you read the strip, you could see the point where all that changes because that character becomes a lot more radicalized and a lot more dismissive of progress and of his opponents. And just kind of crazy.
Yeah.
It mirrors what's happened in the country.
Darrin, when you're doing work that's mirroring the country, like we're in a wild place right now. We've continuously lived in unprecedented times, probably since 2016. I would agree that the seeds of all this was definitely in the Barack Obama presidency. That was the beginning, the first time we probably heard, this is unprecedented, a black president, wild. But in 2016, it feels like a lot of that changed even more. And your work is steeped in this person who is growing and evolving as the country changes. You've also noted that it is a stream of consciousness for you. And also, this is the job that puts food on your table, that like, you know what I mean? That like pays the mortgage, raises your kids, all of that, you know what I mean? Like with all of that in mind, the world is wild right now. We're at a point where we really don't know what happens next. Does that anxiety, do you have anxiety with that? And how do you manage it when it comes to creating something that is parallel to the world as it changes?
Well, I should have a lot more anxiety. I probably have anxiety that I'm not acknowledging. I went to the dentist a few months ago and they took my blood pressure before giving me anesthesia. And I was so relaxed, but they looked at me and they said, "You need to go to the doctor." They said, "Your blood pressure is like," it was sky high. And I had no idea. I was sitting there chilling, just relaxed as can be.
Yeah.
But it's hard for me not to be aware that they're trying to get rid of us. They don't just not want to hear our stories. They want to make us telling our stories taboo.
Yes.
They've passed laws in multiple states making it a crime to hurt the feelings of white students. Not a crime, but it's enough to get you banned from the school district and kicked out of newspapers and called woke dismissively.
You're talking, of course, about the curriculum changes and whatnot that have happened in several states when it comes to teaching history and all that.
Right.
Yeah.
Big chunk of my income used to be sales to teachers who wanted to put my comic strip in academic readers or wanted to use it in school presentations. And they used to do that a lot. And there used to be a lot of dialogue around that. That fell off a cliff, after this movement to ban us started.
Yeah.
Teachers are scared to death to show any of our work.
Yeah, of course, you're talking about a lot of the changes and things becoming more polarized with more conservative ideals being lifted up and even like the rise of Trumpism and more of people kind of going into this direction. And I guess that's kind of what I'm saying is like, what does Candorville look like in 4 years? You know what I mean? Like you're drawing this comic strip and it's like reflecting the country. Do you ever wonder like what it looks like? Do you think that it ever like, oh, actually things turned out all right? Or what does that comic strip look like in 2028?
When I get dismayed and depressed about where the country is and where it might be in 5 years, I kind of realize that there's nothing I can do about that. Political commentary is a reactionary thing. I have to wait till it happens, and then I'll see what I think of it, and then I'll say what I think of it. But in the meantime, I have this outline I can follow. So when things get to be a little too much, I just go back to the characters and do character work. And I find that it's a good way to relax. The following week, I'm going to have something to say about politics, but for this week, I'm going to just talk about Star Trek or something that makes me smile or makes me happy.
And developing the characters, I imagine, is that a separate practice from the actual like drawing of the script? Is that something that you set aside time to do? Also, that sounds like a good practice and intentionality, by the way, if you're doing something that's in the present, thinking about reacting rather than trying to pre-react, but reacting when it actually happens. But is that character development a separate practice from actually the drawing of the characters?
It is, but it doesn't really take a lot of time. Like I know where I want the characters to be in 5 years. And it feels really organic for me because you think about where you want to be yourself in 5 years. You don't really know how you're going to get there, but that's your goal. And each of my characters has a goal for where they want to be in 5 years. At the beginning, it started out as where I wanted them to be, but then they kind of come to life in a way. This might sound weird to anyone who's not a writer, but the more situations you put them in, the more their reactions start to surprise you. And the more you discover about the characters through their reactions, through the things they say, the things they don't say. That in panel 1, when I thought Clyde was going to say something at the end, but he ends up saying something else entirely by panel 4, that's because I discovered something about him along the way. And it makes him more real to me. Yeah. It's been 21 years now. These characters are totally real to me.
Yeah.
They're friends, they're acquaintances, like the minor characters are acquaintances to me. I mean, this might sound sad, but they're almost as real as my real friends.
No, I get it. When I'm making podcasts, when I'm making a podcast episode, one thing I've told people when I'm making it or when I'm helping them with their work is always say, you need to let the episode be what it's going to be. You can't force it to be what you want it to be, but you have to base it on the tape that you have and let it be what's going to be. And it sounds like you're kind of doing that same thing with these characters where you're just like, it's not just me making decisions for them. It's like, you almost are like the AI of your characters where you're just like, you're now responding as they would in this situation on their behalf, as opposing to just forcibly making a comic strip. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I've done so many comic strips about that. long before AI came about, long before people were talking about simulation theory, like decades before they were talking about that, my characters were, every once in a while, they would stop what they're doing and say, am I really having these thoughts? Or are these thoughts being put in my head by the great author in the sky? And you have to wonder, like, is there some higher power that's controlling me or putting these thoughts in my head? Or is it just me?
Yeah.
And my characters do the same. And I think every time I question that about myself, that's when I explore it in the strip and I have the characters question it too. And then to make things even worse, Lamont, the characters he writes, sometimes question it.
Yeah. Wow, Inception.
Yeah.
Wow, so we've covered politics, we've covered religion, all while talking about the creation of your comic strip. I love it. Darrin Bell, thank you so much for being on Working today.
Thanks for having me.
When we come back, Ronald and I will talk about knowing who you are, how you never know what'll get you that next job, and how to keep your anxiety under control while being a politically engaged artist. Stick around.
The IKEA Business Network is now open for small businesses and entrepreneurs. Join for free today to get access to interior design services to help you make the most of your workspace, employee well-being benefits to help you and your people grow, and amazing discounts on travel, insurance, and IKEA purchases, deliveries, and more. Take your small business to the next level when you sign up for the IKEA Business Network for free today by searching IKEA Business Network.
Pulling up to Mickey D's just for drinks? Oh yeah, that's me. Nothing extra, just perfection and a straw. Coming in hot for the coldest cups on the block. Because there are drinks. Then there are drinks from McDonald's.
Mix things up with any size lemonade or sweet tea for $1.49. Perfect with our classic fries. Price and participation may vary. Cannot be combined with any other offer.
Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
Ronald, that was great. I love that Darrin's earliest memory of creativity from when he was 3 connects to what he's doing today, this very minute. My earliest memory of creativity is singing in my underwear along with my grandparents' old 45 of Summertime by the James. So that doesn't really connect to what I do with my creative life. It reminds me of this thing my friend John Cotter, who is a guest on this show, says, where we're all either eels or squids. So squids are like Darrin, right? You look at a baby squid and guess what it looks like?
A small squid?
That is exactly right. It looks like just a small little squid. But baby eels, I don't know if you've ever seen what baby eels look like. They look like these sort of see-through Cthulhu rainbow worm monsters. And at each stage of the eel's development, they look like a different animal. And to some extent, physiologically, they are a different animal. And then eventually, they're an eel. So like I'm an eel, right? Darrin's a squid. Which are you? Do you have a kind of grass is greener on the other side feeling about whichever one you're not?
You know, it's weird. I think I'm an eel. Like I'm fairly certain that I'm an eel. But once I figured out I was a squid, I stayed a squid.
Got it. Because you're some new mutant hybrid.
Yeah,
it grew from an eel into a squid.
Yeah, that's exactly because it took me a while to figure out. Like, I really honestly think that once I figured out what it was, that's the direction that I've been going in the entire time. You know what I mean? Where it's like, oh, it turns out I was a squid all along. So maybe I was an eel in the beginning, like thinking that I was mutating. But if anything, I was a squid amongst eels. And it wasn't until later that I realized, oh, no, I'm a squid. I shouldn't be over here with y'all.
Amazing. I mean, I'm a total eel, and I will admit I have squid envy sometimes because I feel like a decade behind, Yeah. Because I spent my 20s, really hardcore pursuing theater before I switched to hardcore pursuing writing, and now I'm like, man, there's all these books I haven't read because I was like watching plays and shit. I don't know. I have a little bit of envy, or I feel a little behind. And so it's like a little. It's not quite like the midlife crisis I've wasted my life at the age of 45 thing, but I do feel a little bit like I wouldn't mind having some of those years back to pursue writing instead.
That's fair. I think I sometimes like there's times in which I had started earlier, but like once I was locked in to like where I am with audio production and like content creation, any of this, once I got locked in here, I started to look at the ways that I've been doing kind of this all along while, kind of like mimicking the change of an eel. But it turns out like I was kind of locked into this whole time. But I feel like if I could advise you, I'd say like, I mean, you feel kind of similar to that because it feels like now that you've figured out how to swim, you swim very well. So like, you know what I mean? So it's like, I wouldn't.
Also, I taste great in a pie made by a Cockney lass or something.
Are you talking about a squid pie or an eel pie?
I'm talking about an eel pie. You know, in England, they're always like blood. No, I've never tried it.
They be eating weird stuff in England.
Yeah. Little roasted eel sushi. That's a different story, but
different story. Yes.
I speaking of stories, I thought, that question you asked him about, like, how did Candorville happen? And this whole discussion about getting picked up for syndication, that was totally fucking bonkers. A 2 in 6,000 chance in a year, which I did do the math, by the way. I took out a calculator, of course, and that is a 0.03% chance of getting picked up in any given year, which is, I will agree, a tiny bit worse, but only a tiny bit, than being an actor in LA auditioning during pilot season. It is wild how many different strategies he had to try to get there, and it really goes to show that you never know what's going to work. You just have to try something, and often a lot of somethings, to get there.
He's giving kind of a very crystallized version of don't give up. You know what I mean? Like this idea of persistence, of continuing to knock on the door, stay there, keep doing the thing no matter what. And I mean, that's a message that I can get behind. Like me and you are both talking here, like, and we're talking about like people who found their lane in our second acts, if you will, but then got locked in. But there's this idea of saying like, I knew it was something, but maybe I didn't know exactly what it was. In Darrin's case, it was like, I know it is this thing and I'm going to keep trying. In our cases, it was like, well, we thought it was this thing, but it turned out we pivoted slightly and it turns out it's this thing over here. So I think it's still like embraces the concept of never giving up, staying persistent, and like keep moving in the direction that you're going. So, but in his case, I mean, I don't know how much rejection I could take there before I was like, I don't think I'm a cartoonist.
Yeah, totally. Well, I did love this thing where he was like that specific strategy of being like, well, if it's a 0.03% chance, like how the hell do I stand out from this? And then figuring out like, okay, I'll get this placed in some tiny newspapers so that at least I can say like, this is a real thing that already exists,
Yeah. Yeah. No, and see, but that's the thing. Like, for me, I love that thinking because his whole idea was saying if I'm already published, then it's easier to be published. So it makes him say, instead of just sending the letter to the New York Times over and over again, he pivots to the thing that he can get and then uses that to keep sending more letters to the New York Times and more over and over again. It's the Shawshank Redemption library strategy where you send one letter, they send you some books, and then you start sending 2 letters, and then you get more books and so on and so forth.
Yeah, totally. So I got to talk to you about this part where you and he talked about how, as a politically engaged artist or, human for that matter, you deal with the anxiety of the present moment. I loved this thing where, he thinks he's calm and then he goes to the dentist and they're like, oh, you need to go to a hospital, right? They take his BP and they're like, you, my friend, are in some serious trouble. But seriously, it does seem like he's found some strategies that work, that he can compartmentalize. I'm not particularly great at that. But then he also, could be like, okay, well, next week I'm going to deal with my political anxiety in the comic. This week, their story is going to be about something else that's in my ongoing outline or whatever. This is a very weird time. As we're recording this, we don't know who's going to be running for president for the Democrats, probably. Matt Gaetz was on TV yesterday looking like some kind of haunted banshee monster. Project 25 is scary as all get out. What do you do? Do you have any strategies that are working to keep the howling fantods at bay so that you can do your work?
Recently I was driving to Richmond, Virginia. I live in Alexandria, Virginia. I was driving to Richmond, Virginia, and I was talking to my sister.
Richmond, Virginia.
Yeah. Shout out to VCU. Shout out to Richmond.
Yeah, the fan, baby.
Yeah, you know what's up. So I'm driving. I'm talking to my sister, and I say, it just hit me like an epiphany. I'm just like, I've decided I'm just not going to be afraid anymore, because I feel like the anxiety that I have around all of this stuff is all about what's going to happen tomorrow, whether or not I'm going to be afraid, or whether or not we're going to be okay based on who's in office, what's going to happen to us, that type of thing. And I think like we as a country often have the tendency to push things all the way down to the end of how far they can go. I mean, but the truth is, in most cases along our history, when we were thinking this way, it was never the thing that we thought was obvious that would kill us all. You know, maybe the nuclear holocaust or the super predators. At some point they said, like, whatever it was, they always thought that there was
Killer
bees. Killer bees.
Do you remember Killer Bees?
Yeah, no, I remember in the 90s they were like, as a second grader, I was like, we're going to die and it's going to be killer bees.
It's the bees, man. They're coming from Texas to kill us all.
Yeah, but like all of that, we thought it was going to be something every single time. And it turns out like our anxieties were worse than the actual reality of what was happening. So I've just decided to not be afraid. And also, I just don't watch the news as much. I get the headlines, I find out what's going on. And then when I feel myself, blood pressure going up, I just decide what show I'm going to rewatch and put to my to-do list of my work I need to do and get heads down and just keep getting to work, because I'm like, even if the world is going to end, it's not going to end without me accomplishing my goals.
Yeah, no, I totally feel you on that. I mean, my strategies are a little bit different, I think, or the ones that the ideal version of me should be following. This is as much advice to me as it is to anyone else about dealing with anxiety. But one of them is, a lot of the stuff that I'm anxious about. Is Biden going to remain on the ticket? To just take one example, right? That's something I have literally no ability to impact whatsoever. Like there's nothing I can do. Nothing. Me posting on Blue Sky about it is not going to change anything, right?
Yeah.
So there's no point in my worrying about it on some level is what I keep trying to tell myself, right? There's nothing to worry about because there's nothing I can personally do. Then there's political stuff that I can make some small impact on. Do you know what I mean by donating, volunteering, whatever it is, going to a march, and I actually find that whenever I'm feeling the most alienated and despondent and anxious about the state of the world, actually doing something, even if it's small, about it, getting more involved in a cause is almost always the best medicine. You know what I mean? Like when I felt my worst about what was going on in Gaza, what's going on in Gaza right now. When I felt my worst about it, I went to a Jewish Voice for Peace march, right?
Yes.
Like someone texted me and they're like, hey, there's a Jewish Voice for Peace march tomorrow. Do you want to go? And I was like, oh, yeah, I'm going to go to that, And like, that was really healing to stand outside of Chuck Schumer's door and tell him to cut off the, money for weapons and everything like that. But like that left me feeling like really rejuvenated and in a way where, I had actually done something. And so that felt really great.
Yeah, I like that. I like that idea. You're talking about like the very natural control what you can't control, and like don't worry about the things that you can't. Don't dwell on those things.
I have the slight problem that like one of the things about my book that I'm working on right now, which is about the culture wars of the 80s and 90s, is that, of course, part of it is that how much it presages what's going on now, right? So it's like when I see Project 2025 talking about here's all this stuff we have to do to protect our kids or whatever, it's like, oh my God, this is the same rhetoric that Jesse Helms was using in the 90s. So it becomes a little inescapable, right?
Yeah.
And so that is the part I haven't figured out how to solve yet is because the work I'm doing is raising the same anxieties as the news.
Yeah. I think if you focus again on your own mantra, which is controlling the things you can and not worrying about the ones you can. And rest, Isaac. Rest, like sit down and rest when you can. Turn things off. When you're like he's like, I'm taking a nap right now.
Taking a nap right. You don't actually know this, but I'm asleep. This is me asleep. Amazing. Well, thank you for the advice, Ronald. That is all the time we have for this week. I'm going to make one more Slate Plus pitch, though, before you go. The Slate Plus-keteers, they get full access behind the paywall. They get to listen to bonus segments on shows like this one. They get bonus full episodes of shows like Decoder Ring and Slow Burn, all for a reasonable fee. Go to slate.com/workingplus to sign up today and support what we do right here on Working.
Thank you so much to our guest, Darrin Bell, and to our series producer, Cameron Drews, who always makes sure we've colored within the lines. This episode was co-produced by Kevin Bendis. Thank you so much, Kevin. Join us next week when our guests will be Lauren Metchling and Rachel Dodds. They are co-authors of a new novel. Until then, get back to work.